check. All right, good afternoon once again. We go into our following session, which is Critical Internet Resources, Contentious Global Policy Issue. Our chair for today is Amitabh Singhal, bod.org, the Public Internet Registry. Our panelists are Kuek Yu-Chuang, VP Asia ICANN, Cherian Samuel, Associate Fellow IDSA, and Parminder Jeet Singh, ED IT for Change. May we have you on stage, please? I now hand over the session to our chair.
Do I get to the podium or do I speak from here? Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to this session on critical internet resources, contentious global policy issues. So we are already starting with this contentious issue, right? So it's going to be complicated? No. I think what we have decided as a panel is that we'll keep it simple. My name is Amitabh Singhal. I sit on the board of directors of Public Interest Registry, which runs a domain name called .org. This was one of the first three original domain names, .com, .net, .org. And of course, everyone is aware that ICANN opened up the market recently, and we'll see a flood of new domain names running into hundreds and possibly about 1,500, 1,700 new names. So that's where the internet is going. So instead of these 23 domain names that we had initially, plus the CCTLDs, the country codes, total of about 328 TLDs that we have worldwide, will possibly run into 1,900 odd new names. So what it will do to the internet is something that is going to be very interesting space to watch, and I think that process is beginning to happen now with certain IDNs coming in. They're not yet put into the root, but I think the process is on. 5 or 6 new TLDs have been put in the root. They are going to be delegated shortly and launched. So we are on the way to seeing a new internet emerge. How it will work, for me as a user, I really don't know. How the search engines are going to play it out, we don't know. Okay? That's one part of what's coming up. Now, how does this all happen? This is about domain name system. As a user, we are all aware what is DNS. I suppose the audience knows about it. The domain name system basically is where your IP address and your host name that you know, the unique resource locator, which is your URL, gets resolved. It is resolved by at the root server level, which is managed by an organization called IANA, Internet Assigned Names and Numbers. Yeah, sorry about this. Okay, so IANA functions under a contract with the government of US, which managed by NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Authority, which functions in the Department of Commerce. Now this is legacy, because when internet developed as part of the academia, okay, as part of a defense experiment and then into academia, evolved into a system which went into ARPANET and then NSFNet. So slowly when it emerged, IANA function in terms of managing the IP addresses was managed by one person called John Postel. Okay, so it was a one-man show till 1998. Okay, and of course subsequently after he passed away, it was assigned to somebody else. But then finally, ICANN was given the role of overseeing this entire IANA function of how internet addresses get allocated. So that's one of the responsibilities that IANA has. Now, when we talk about so IP addresses, the names and numbers business that it does in terms of distributing it globally is where the entire contentious issues that we talk about in brackets lies. Okay. And the contention has come up more recently in the last year and a half since the governments have started to evolve a role for themselves as to how ICANN manages this whole function. what is the role of the various stakeholders around the globe? Now, the stakeholders are various constituencies that ICANN has, which is you have commercial constituencies, you have non-commercial constituencies, you have also the GAC, which is the Government Advisory Committee. Now, they have started to increasingly play a role, and that role came into focus when this entire domain name system was being opened up for more and more domain names to come in. Now, GAC actually played a much more vigorous part in terms of trying first to not let ICANN do it, saying that, okay, it'll probably not work, so please pull back, do not open up the market to this extent. I think there were reservations, but then those are overridden, and ICANN did decide during Singapore conference in 2011 that fine, they're going to open up, and it's happening. So that's when the GAC role came in sharply. I will not go into the legacy of WSIS and everything else, but then what is also happening is with the Snowden revelation that happened about surveillance and how the US government was involved in massive surveillance activities, governments have again woken up and become more vociferous in trying to play a bigger, sharper role in the policy space in terms of how the DNS system is run. Now, what is the relation between the two is something that we'll probably end up discussing, and I'll leave it to my learned fellow panelists to talk about that later on. So that's the framework that we are trying to look at today in our discussion. So let me just quickly then come to introductions. Parminder is the Executive Director of IT for Change. It's an NGO which is based out of India. And he has a special consultative status with the UN's Economic and Social Council. On my left is Kuek, Yu-Chuang. He is ICANN's Vice President and Managing Director for the Asia Pacific region. So for today's discussion, I think he's the most critical resource that we have. Critical resource. And we'll see how we have to manage his idea of what ICANN functions like. Yes, you get a little more airtime, hopefully, unless taken up by ITU or UN, because these are the two ends of the spectrum that we have in terms of contentions. And then we have Cherian. He's an associate fellow in the Strategic Technology Center at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA. So he comes from the cybersecurity and defense space. Which is why I mentioned Snowden, even though it's not really, to my mind, very relevant to the issue that we have on a larger scale. But I guess it's a point of interest because it does say a lot about how internet is run. Okay, so that's where I come from. So first of all, I would like to ask Parminder his views about how he sees the role of the US government managing a contract with IANA, managing the entire DNS system, the root zone files, and any action that happens in terms of management decisions are in the hands of the US government, period. People are saying this is non-transparent, people are saying this is non-accountable, this is not the way it should be. More and more stakeholders around the globe should have a say in running and managing. Okay, there are various societies around the globe, various constituencies who say that yes, we should have a multi-stakeholder model which is much more widespread than it is today. Okay, so Parminder, your views to begin with on this whole issue.
Thank you, Amitabh. I'll speak in three parts, probably the first part in the first intervention itself and probably move the other parts to later interventions. I would like to speak about what CIRs are and what is contentious about them. Second, what is specific or special about CIR governance, critical internet resources. And third, the burning question, is there an alternative? We say that US unilateral control is not right, but then we have to come up with models of then what, and we have been talking of some such models and probably propose one here. Amitabh has kind of outline what critical internet resources we are talking about. Internet runs on names and number resources because people have to find out whom they need to talk to and that message should reach them, and therefore each person, each address is given a number. The number is then kind of topped up by a name which is easier to find, and these resources have to be distributed worldwide, and that's what ICANN does. And US has a certain oversight over this function of the ICANN. Now the question, when does a thing become contentious? When it becomes a public policy issue. what's a technical issue and public policy issue is important to understand. A technical issue is one which we all agree needs a solution, and the only difference is which is the best way to go. If this room starts leaking, it's uncomfortable to all of us, and how to plug that leak is a technical issue, and we all will agree on that needs to be done, but then A, B, C, D are less efficient or more efficient ways of doing it. But then there are issues when there are different interests. I mean, we are being allocated space in a big hall, and I want a better space for myself, I want a bigger space than my secretary. Who decides these kind of things when there are political differences? And then it becomes a public policy issue when there are real political differences. So I think we need to understand the difference between the two, and in understanding the difference lies the contention. Initially things have been a little kind of calm, because for a long time we thought that, okay, internet is new, is benefiting all of us, it's running well, and actually it does run well. There was a distributed system of doing technical governance and CI governance, which is very good. It's exemplary and should be preserved in its uniqueness as it is. It has been doing well. And let it be. That was the general sentiment. However, we should recognize that every technical artifact is a baby of the historical time and space where it is born. And internet being born in late 80s and 90s, the Clinton era, a marketization of everything, ideology, is a baby of that particular ideology. And nobody should have any doubt that if internet was born in, say, Iceland, not to speak of India or Philippines, it would have been quite different even in its architecture and its technical shape. Now, I'm not making a very strong point about it, that we needed it to be different, but to understand that these kind of things matter. And the internet at its base espouses a market fundamentalist ideology, which have transferred into its governance system, and which is showing some problems, which I will come to, which Amitabh said, the new GTLDs, etc. And the second issue is that of the sovereignty. The nations don't feel very comfortable that there is a critical internet infrastructure which underlies defense, business, everything, and somebody has some kind of a special role with regard to it. Even if they don't understand it fully, I would understand people won't be uncomfortable, and countries are not comfortable. And that was still going on till a few things happened, and I'll come to the second stage. What happened recently? One was Snowden. I mean, Snowden dispelled that moral authority that US had, that it's a upholder of freedoms, etc., and that's best trusteeship for the internet. Even more than earlier, governments thought, okay, if they can do those kind of things, I don't want to leave an infrastructure in their hands. There have been other things happening. There is a securitization of the root. Root was largely earlier open, not very secure, but with the kind of crimes coming in, there is a tendency to secure the root. And more you secure a system, you create points of control. And the architecture chosen to secure the root is quite centralized, and which increases the points of control. And I don't want to go into how it operates, but to understand that these things matter. And for other governments, it becomes, okay, why don't we have some kind of a neutral body which has an oversight? Now, there is a paradox here. When the oversight is with US, people would say, there's nothing in that oversight, so what's the big issue? And that's fine. If there's nothing in that oversight, then why don't you just give it to somebody else? Because if there's nothing, then the other guy is going to get nothing. But if it goes to the UN, they say, no, the UN is out to control the internet. And the same thing is not control under the US, but it is control if it goes to anybody else. And the last part in this present intervention is about what happened when the new GTLDs were rolled out. And I think many of you would know that ICANN allowed .book, .hotels, .health, .amazon, which is a cultural property of some groups and people, as private GTLDs, as private spaces which people can just own and do their business on. And that thing, I don't think would have happened so easily if internet was outside the US. Also remember that internet GTLDs are subject to US courts. One US court can just step in today and say .health is anti-competitive, and therefore ICANN would have to strike it down. Executive authority, which is Foreign Assets Control Office of the US, can say that this closed GTLD of so-and-so Indian generic company which is running cheap medicines is doing things which are against our policy, so it should be closed down. And if they make that ruling, ICANN has to close down that because ICANN is subject to the US laws. So these things are obviously legally not tenable. So I think we have reached a point where the present early system, which was kind of a balance which people didn't disturb too much, has come to a point when we need to move on and we need to figure out how can we keep the distributed system of CIR managements, but under a public policy oversight which is more democratic internationally. I think, Amitabh, this much right now.
Okay, thank you, Parminder. I think you raised quite a few issues. So we are talking about technical issues, we are talking about public policy issues, we are talking even about political issues underlying this entire contentious thing that we have on our hands now, and it's escalating. Okay, and people are talking about trying to come to some kind of a global framework that is acceptable to all, which is neither I can, neither I to you. We don't know what that framework is going to be like. No one's offered that alternative. Everyone's talking about an alternative. So we have a situation where after the revelation of surveillance, Brazil wakes up and says, okay, we'll break away from the internet as it is and we'll create our own internet. So balkanization of internet is something that is being talked about. Now that has resulted into ICANN going and supporting, or at least seemingly on the face of it, trying to support some voices which probably move away from the structure that we have in place already. And there's been some discussion within the ICANN circles about how ICANN or what ICANN's role will be going forward with countries talking about breaking away from the internet as we know it. So these are the kind of things that are emerging. Okay, and there are too many of these issues. I don't know whether we have the time to get into all those issues, but broadly I think I'll now like to pass it on to Kuek first to tell us about ICANN or his understanding of what ICANN is facing in terms of these issues, how it sees its role developing in terms of how it manages the IANA, and how is it already a multi-stakeholder platform where everyone has a say in the policy making, as Parminder was talking about, whether the governments and the private sector both have a role already, how much is it, and what is it that bothers people today. So Kuek, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I think this is a perfect time to have this conversation because there are a lot of conflicting narratives out there, and I think it's the collective responsibility of the panel here today as well as this group to make sure that we get a lot more clarity out of the discussion so that collectively we arrive at better public policy as Parminder mentioned. So first and foremost, I guess you can tell by the fact that the lights have been dimmed when I speak is that ICANN is shrouded in mystery. Otherwise, why would you have the lights dimmed? And hopefully, you know, when I'm here today, I can help to demystify a lot of things. If you look at the conference guide that has been given out today, for example, I think there are some things there that need some clarifications. For example, it says things like the IANA functions are under the control of a professor in a university. So this, for example, is something that, as you mentioned, is a legacy issue. It's John Postel. If you look at it right now, and very often if you look at what's written in the press right now, it seems that, oh, you know, it's something as arbitrary, that something as critical as the DNS lies in the hands of an American professor in a university. The fact is that this was a legacy issue that John Postel did until his death in 1998. And right now, the IANA function falls under ICANN. And so this, for example, is something that is not accurate. Another thing that it says, for example, that, oh, there's a lack of accountability of root zone operators. And I guess that refers to ICANN. And that's worrying, because if IANA falls under the ICANN functions, and if, oh, the lights are back. So I've succeeded in demystifying the role of ICANN. And that if ICANN is not accountable, then there's a problem. So I think the reason why we have this, a lot of it is the fault of ICANN. I am brand new to my role, and it's a new role. The role only started in August, and we have never been at a table like this providing the clarifications and the information that people are seeking And I think it's helpful that we're finally at the table now to be part of the conversation, so that a lot of the clarity you're seeking has some way of getting to you. So I'll very quickly, in the time allotted to me, come up with 2 clarifications and 2 invitations. So the first clarification I feel I have to make is because the narrative that I've been getting a lot is that, okay, IANA has a relationship with the US government, there is the Snowden revelations, therefore we have a problem because the US has lost its moral authority, and if it is guided, if it's the force that is guiding the work of IANA, that has to be a national security issue. So the first clarification I'm going to make is that IANA and ICANN has a very narrow mandate that is governed by the publicly available bylaws and the Constitution. We only look at the root zone and the DNS. We don't look into content per se. So if you came to me as someone on ICANN's leadership team and wanted to do surveillance or wanted to look into content, there is nothing that I can give you. And so the first clarification I want to put down is that the internet has emerged as a result of an elaborate design that has been thought through. That is a myth, and I want to debunk that. The fact that, you have 13 named authorities, and a lot of these named authorities, or the root servers, depending on how you want to call them, a lot of them are in the US. As mentioned by Amitabh, is a legacy issue where even before the US, the world, or anyone else knew of the commercial viability of the internet, someone had to put these servers out to test them. There was no commercial return in the way that we know it today that is being done. So a lot of people are saying that, does this undermine the interests of a certain group or of a certain country or of a certain community? The fact is that this is the result of an evolution. The relationship with the US is that as well. And so that is the first clarification that I want to make. The second clarification that I want to make is that, there's an assumption that what we have right now as a system is one that is static. I'm saying that it's not static, it's dynamic. We broke up from Los Angeles into 3 global hubs only since August. So under the new arrangement, IANA will have 3 global hubs, ICANN will have 3 global hubs in Los Angeles, in Istanbul, and in Singapore. And I only started in August to build up the Singapore hub. A lot of people look at the relationship with the US as well, but, understand that the affirmation of commitments that ICANN has is something that came about only in 2009. And so a lot of this, because we acknowledge that it's a legacy issue, a lot of this is still being evolved as we speak, and it's not static. There are a lot of concerns that are being raised today that are at this moment being addressed. For example, at the Durban ICANN meeting that we had in July this year, and all ICANN meetings are completely open, free of charge, for people to just walk in and take part, and you can just take the microphone. If you cannot travel to a location, all information is available through remote participation on the internet. So that's how open and transparent the process is. But announced in Durban was specifically strategic panels that are mandated to look into how we evolve this further, to further the point that I'm putting across that things are not static. Okay, if you think that the relationship with the US is an issue, Vince Cerf is leading a strategic panel to see how we're going to evolve that. If it's not going to be the US, what is it going to be? Is it going to be the UN? Is it going to be another model? This panel specifically looks into that. Also, if you think that the way ICANN is being run right now, the way that we're getting feedback or the way that we are implementing policies is not ideal. Beth Novak leads another strategic panel to look into the way that information is collected. If you think that the way that root servers are allocated around the world is a problem, Paul Mokapitras is leading a specific strategic panel to look at the design of these allocation of resources. So I want to tell you as well, so that this is not something that is static, that is set in stone, that I'm here today to defend or ICANN staff is here to defend. It's something that we're constantly evolving. The question is, if we don't have a relationship with US, what is coming in to replace it? How do we ensure a smooth transition? So that is the second clarification I want to make. And following the two clarifications, I want to make two invitations as well. The first invitation is an invitation to any of the ICANN meetings. I hear very often that there's a lack of transparency and accountability in ICANN. Let me briefly explain how the ICANN multi-stakeholder model works. Basically, ICANN meetings are announced in advance where it's going to be. The next one is going to be in the last week of March in Singapore. And it's open for registration. Anyone can walk in, get a badge. We make sure that it's free of charge so that people come. We are also mindful that people are not able to may not be able to travel to these meetings, and so we also give out fellowships so that people can attend these meetings. The meetings are open mic. If you feel that there's anything like the new GTLD program, for example, or I can talk about .book and .amazon. There's currently a process. Part of it is with a gag, part of it is with other parts on the new GTLD program. If you have a point of view and you want to put it across, it's completely open mic. It ends with a public forum where basically people just come, anyone comes up and you can just say anything. We are also, these are open for volunteers, and it falls under the support organizations that we want to make sure that if you're a business, you have somewhere to go to. If you represent a CCTLD operator as well, you have somewhere to voice it. I want to call out two specific committees of part of the ICANN process. One is the ALAC, and that's the At-Large Advisory Committee, and that is meant for if you don't fit naturally into any one of these buckets. And a lot of our friends from civil society go there. Minister Sybil this morning talked about providing a voice for the voiceless. The ALAC is a place where many of our friends within the community who don't fall into any of the support organizations can go to. And you can go to the website right now. You can form an at-large structure in India, and there's several in India right now to register your organization to be part of the process. There's also the Governmental Advisory Committee. And let me give this to you as an example for a problem like Parminder mentioned, like .amazon. So Amazon, the company, tried to apply for the new GTLD.Amazon. 5 countries in South America, including Brazil and the others that have territorial jurisdiction over the Amazon, put up an objection. And because of that government objection, .Amazon is being put on hold as part of the process. In India, there are other examples as well. And this is what we call the multi-stakeholder model, where people from the technical community, the industry, and governments can all come together to come up with solutions for the internet without necessarily empowering one organization over the other. So I promised you 2 invitations. That's one invitation to the ICANN meetings. The next one is in Singapore, which is just 2.5 hours away in terms of time zone. So if you're not able to go physically, remote participation should be easy as well. It's within the time zone. The second invitation is for people here to look at this website, and if you want to sign on to it, it's www.1net.org, N-E-T-O-R-G. The OneNet initiative is specifically, the idea is to specifically design this to address issues that don't belong to ICANN or the IANA function, like the surveillance issues that we talk about. The truth is that right now, if you wanted the world to come together to have a discussion on spam or internet content, there is no natural home for that discussion to happen. And the OneNet initiative is meant to be a platform to think about what should be a new model of governance be in terms for people to go out there and influence change. And this is in response to Parminder's point on why some people are uncomfortable with the UN stepping in to take control. I think the revelations that Snowden has revealed is that there needs to be checks and balances against the US government, and there needs to be checks and balances against all governments. If you have a UN body which is just G2G, looking at something as critical as the internet that has flourished through a largely light-touch regulatory environment, are you putting this under threat? And do you need the technical community and industry to join governments as equal stakeholders in that conversation? So this is specifically what we're looking for. If you go to an ICANN meeting, for example, you can just take the mic and take part in the conversation. If you go to an APT or ITU meeting, for example, there are conditions on invitations. It really depends on whether you're an APT member or not. If you go for the ITU meeting as industry, for example, you might be allowed to attend the meeting, but you're not allowed to, in some cases, speak or in some cases, vote. And this gives the technical community and industry a bit of discomfort, which is why some people have expressed discomfort with the UN taking over the function. So I've gone on long enough. Amitabh has been very kind, so I'll leave things there.
I'm sure I'll come back to you because there will be some issues coming up. But I take the feedback from you, and I think the audience should now know that what he's talked about is, I think one of the things that I've always felt about personally being from the internet community here in India for a long time, I think ICANN does offer that platform where people can go and participate. Okay, they can participate to the extent that they can provide feedback, they can attend meetings, they can speak there. Okay, but I find that not many people from India ever do that. Okay, so that's one thing that we need to raise. Okay, and I thought it will be a good platform to tell the audience here that they can, and there are systems built in which enable people to go and participate and have a better say, right? So that's one part. Okay, the other thing that you talked about was, or at least this is what you feel as an ICANN representative, that Snowden revelations really do not have a relationship with what we are talking about, which is about IANA functions and the management and transparency and accountability. But I think there is a fleeting relationship because the revelations have had repercussions on the national security interests of every government, and because of which the governments now feel that the way internet is run under the control and authority of the US government, they need to have a better way of having a say, right? Now, what I'll do is I'll request Mr. Cherian, who comes from the defense background, to give his views on what the Snowden revelation has done in terms of the thinking in the defense circles about how to secure a nation's information system. And I do know that maybe defense has not yet put out a position. Government also is trying to, on its part, trying to create a let's say, a policy position, right? The National Security Council Secretariat is trying to say that, and that paper is still to be made, but I think what they're trying to say is that there should be a multilateral platform available. Now, by multilateral versus multi-stakeholder platform that we talk about at the global level, there's a difference. So multilateral, to my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, is more to do about more governments having more say than they have had. Okay, so that's where we are at. So India is trying to build up a position on this. Okay, so your views on this entire episode of Snowden and then its repercussions on how internet should be run from India's perspective.
Thank you. Speaking on the impact of the Snowden revelations, I think for a long time governments were lulled into complacency. They took a very benign view of the internet. It was seen as a global commons. That was and it was pretty much running very well as it is. And then you have the Snowden revelations and you wake up and find out that it's been turned into a giant surveillance machine. And so governments are starting to look at the entire governance and structure with fresh eyes. And I think nothing is off the table, including the way all the organizations function. And so to that extent, it will affect, it will impact ICANN as well. ICANN, to an extent, has had a kind of an adversarial reaction, impact, in the sense when you think of ICANN, you immediately think of the fact that the US government has a major role and so on. So if you go back to 2003 and the working group on internet security, which was headed by Nitin Desai, I'd just like to read out a paragraph from the report. And it says, it describes internet governance as the development and application by governments, the private sector and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. And then in the next paragraph it says, it should be made clear, however, that internet governance includes more than internet names and addresses issues dealt with by ICANN. It also includes other significant public policy issues such as critical internet resources, the security and safety of the internet, development aspects, and issues pertaining to the use of the internet. 10 years later, we are still grappling with the form and shape of what exactly ICANN should be doing. So you haven't even begun to address the other broader issues that are that were flagged by the working group at that time. And ICANN's governance and structure and so on should have been something quite simple compared to the broader issues. But you're still, there's dissatisfaction with ICANN among the stakeholders and within ICANN itself. It's constantly trying to, this is what I see from a distance. It could be different otherwise, but, within ICANN itself, it's constantly trying to reinvent itself. So, when you have this kind of a flux, complete flux, it takes some time for existing views to change. So, we were lulled into so much complacency that even official business of the government takes place through internet services like Gmail and so on. So you're starting from ground zero, as it were, in trying to get all these services onto the looking at it in terms of having all the servers within the country. And being a developing country, you also have to take the cost into consideration. You're reinventing the wheel to an extent. So there's a whole gamut of issues that you have to consider when you think in terms of security. And in the meantime, the internet meant many things in the earliest days, but now it just boils down to Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and 2 or 3 other companies, all of which happen to be in the United States. So combined with the dominance of the US government, as it were, there's a complete imbalance when it comes to internet governance. So these are all the various issues, I think, that have to be considered in detail when it comes to...
So from defense, what you've done is to jump into the cybercrime issues, which are also very relevant in terms of what we're discussing today at the global stage. Is becoming relevant because, yes, the fact remains, and I think we have to accept the fact that legacy is such. Internet started in the US. The biggest service providers, the internet companies, are in the US. Most of the content resides in the US. The traffic originates and terminates in the US, most of it, despite our local internet exchanges being around for quite a while. So given the fact that internet has been a legacy of the United States, yes, the dominant infrastructure for internet happens to be there. Now, because of which, there is another problem that has been now discussed in certain platforms which I have been part of, has been the issue of fighting crime. Now, most of the governments have also, apart from the defense issue or surveillance, it's also about day-to-day cybercrime fighting. They say that today, if Indian government, the police authorities or the agencies want to extract information from, let's say, Google or Microsoft or a Yahoo, Despite the fact that we have multilateral mutual legal assistance treaties and all that, and there are other conventions by way of which we should be able to secure information that we need by the authorities to investigate crimes happening on the net, it does not happen that easily. Okay, because the information either comes too late or it never probably comes, right? So that's another critical area which has made the governments open up and say, okay, let's see and let's look as to how internet is being run. And because it's predominantly there in the States, we need to change it. But is it really possible? Because which country today can replicate the entire internet infrastructure the way it is? And that also has a relevance in terms of when ICANN talks about security and stability, and that is one of the mandates that it has. How do you secure the stability of internet if you were to say that, okay, let's move the functions out of US so that more and more local governments or local communities have a say? It seems to be such a ethereal space that we really don't know how it's going to shape up. So that's something which I thought maybe you could probably throw a little more light on.
Yeah, that's actually the whole tragedy of what's happened is that whatever trust deficit there was has only increased, I think, beyond hope for redemption. Yeah, because you need a certain amount of the whole issue with getting cybercrime, with getting law enforcement agencies to go beyond the tools of the 20th century like MLATs to the 21st century is about sovereignty and jurisdiction. And if you have something like this, where what was seen as okay, this is you have to. There's a certain amount of forbearance when it comes to the way giving a looser rein to the internet, and then you find that it has actually been subverted. That it's been used to kind of make sure that there are no laws. I mean, even now, the US government says that no laws have been broken when it comes to this mass surveillance.
Parminder, your views on no laws have been broken, that's an interesting statement.
No, what's the question?
No. He's saying that the US feels that no laws have been broken despite all the overbearing surveillance that has been done. So that's a very interesting comment.
Yeah, so that is actually at the core of the issue, that earlier nations were able to stay the way they are because we didn't have too much of interferences or participation in other people's life. But now we are dealing with a global internet, which is global first and national later on. And if we don't make some global agreements, we'll keep on coming back to this issue that any country would say, I didn't break my own laws. And that's not the point, because you have broken a global norm which doesn't exist and which has therefore to be codified in some public policy principles. We are not saying you set up a police station globally and you know that global law is in any case very soft. I mean, when did last UN march into somebody's house and arrest somebody? But UN does give us frames under which people can have global cooperation. And if you don't have those kind of frames, we would keep on coming back to this situation. Now, we have a global internet. We decided it should be global. We want to live together in it, and not like the earlier times when we were at national boundaries. If we decide that, we need to have global agreements, and that has to be done in a neutral venue.
Okay, so a global agreement. Now that's something which is again very contentious, because we have on one side the ITU stand and we have the ICANN stand. ICANN says, okay, this is multi-stakeholder platform in any case. We can only improve it, and they're talking about globalization, spreading out of the US, and then probably trying to bring in more communities in how they participate in ICANN. Then you have ITU, which has a framework, okay, which is basically governed by the interests of public policy that are kept in mind when the governments frame rules and regulations.
No, it's not necessarily ITU, but there are many other ways.
Many other ways. So now those are the ways that we haven't really been able to get a clue on as to what kind of frameworks will emerge. I mean, will there be some new international treaty that will come up? Is that a possibility? What kind of framework do you think Kuek one would be looking at? Because again, it's all in the air right now.
So I think we're in agreement more than you might think here. I mean, I think there's agreement all around that there should be a set of norms. There should be you can call it an agreement. You can call it a set of norms. You can call it a code, you can call it about global standards. There's agreements here. The question, I guess, whether it should be something like what the IETF has, or is it something like what the ITU or the UN has, or should it be, as the minister mentioned this morning, something like what the WTO has? So I guess in our view, we agree that these norms and this agreement will be helpful. We hope that it is going to be built in a way that is multi-stakeholder, where governments, industry, technical communities, civil society, academia, and users can all come together and agree on this. I guess that's the only thinking we have on that in terms of what kind of principles or values we want to see being manifested. And the OneNet initiative that has gained so much traction is exactly meant to be a process where all of us can come together to the table to design what this new framework can be like. And earlier on you mentioned that ICANN has a process, but India has not been participating as actively as it should. And it's true. I think to date, up till now, amongst all our boards, the most active board member that we've had that is an Indian national was Rajasekhar Ramiraj. And we want to see more of the Kato-sangs from Japan, for example, or more. Right now we have someone from Taiwan Kuek. My job here really is to encourage participation from the Asia-Pacific region into the ICANN process, because we find a bit of a problem where we go in and it's almost like an old boys club where people who have known each other for so many years are talking to each other, and we're not drawing new blood in, and we're not drawing people where the most exciting technologies and demographic numbers are coming from. So the idea of having an APAC hub and my role, my reason for existence is really to encourage more participation from this part of the world.
I have a question from Kuek. Kuek, I understand participation, everybody invites participation, that's good, but we were on the governance issue. The question I asked was simple. Today, if a US court gives a ruling that XXX was wrongly delegated, it was delegated to the wrong party, it should be suspended, it should be removed, it should be changed, what would ICANN do? Second, if a new GTLD, which is a company's GTLD, a new GTLD, a closed GTLD is an arm of that company, it is a business space of that company, gets sold to an Iranian company, and the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the US says that that's an asset of an Iranian company which they would like to seize. And that rule applies on ICANN being an ICANN body. What does ICANN do? That's the key question here.
I can add to that.
Sure. Okay. So I can give you a very specific. Okay, I'll be quick. I can give you a very specific example. So Chrysler is an American company. It makes cars. One of the cars they make is RAM, RAM, and so it tried to apply for .RAM. And if you look at US law, there's no problem with it as well. The Indian government put an objection, obviously because that there could be disrespect or there could be problems if the domain name is not treated properly, and a deity within this culture is, you can imagine the problems. And so this is exactly an example of an ICANN process where it's not that, I'm a US company and I comply with US law and under US trademarks is no problem and therefore I get to rule the world. This is an example where you have a US company having to answer to the objections of one of the many participants in this global framework that we have.
Okay, let me interject here. What he's trying to ask is, see today, and I am aware of this personally, registries which run the top level domain names within the jurisdiction of the US courts are often asked to take down sites. Okay, now these are unilateral decisions given by the courts of the US. Okay, and I think it is within the US there is some disquiet about how this is managed, because there's no public hearing. Okay, I think it's managed with the agencies, and the courts just issue orders to take down sites. Now, it does not matter whether those sites are based in the US or outside the US. Right? So that's extraterritorial intervention that US authorities seem to exercise. Now, that's the contentious issue that everyone talks about. Okay, what do you do about that? Okay. Right, so that's one thing. Now, coming back to all the IANA functions, okay, there's another thing that cropped up in my mind. I thought I'll need to ask either Parminder or you can throw some more light. One of the criticisms was allocation of address space. Okay, IANA allocated addresses to the regional internet registries, which had an address pool, and how they distributed further to the ISPs and the other organizations. That's the part of the management of the address space. When we had IPv4, the biggest criticism, and I used to hear that within India itself, was, okay, the US corners most of the IPv4 addresses, and most of the other countries and regional geographies do not get their fair share of addresses. Now, that was a big starting point in terms of how IANA function is managed, and people got interested in wanting to know more about it. Now, with IPv6, unlimited address space, is that something which is relevant still, or is it not relevant? So maybe Parminder, you can start.
See, this goes back to the question. I don't think that our internet was created with a grand design. I just said it imbibes the ideology and public policy principles of the environment in which it's born, without a design, but that's what happens. And that may not be the global principles. And this is an example. Whether number resources should be treated as property or a licensed public resource. In India, probably we would have liked to treat it as a licensed public resource, and if you have access, you just give it back and give it to the people who don't have it and need it. But ICANN treated it as a property, which is resoldable. Now, this is a public policy principle, and we try to see it as a neutral technical thing, which it is not. It is a public policy issue. And public policy issues have to be decided in a different manner than how technical policy issues are decided. And that is a crucial point.
So I guess, what was before the IPv4 issue? You had
I was talking about IPv4 when there was this whole the contention was how the address allocation was done. Okay. So people had this whole thing about maybe US has better control, and then most of the IPv4 addresses, large blocks of addresses were cornered by the US organizations, right? And others didn't get fair share. Now, that was one of the accountability issues that people were talking about. Okay. But is that relevant now with IPv6 coming in?
Okay. So again, this is another one of those issues where it's legacy issues. Before we knew that we were going to have this proliferation of devices that were going to come on, before we expect all these new population numbers to be on the internet, at the initial stages, IPv4 allocations were given out in a way that was not as systematic as we hoped it would be. And the IPv6, the thought of IPv6 as a solution was specifically meant to address the fact that, there are going to be countries like India which will have new demographic numbers coming on board, and you wouldn't want the situation where you run out of IPv4 numbers because of IPv4 exhaustion, and you either have a situation where address becomes some overpriced commodity, or entire markets such as India will not get the allocation. And that's how IPv6 came about, as a solution that is meant to address that. As to whether or not which is the most ideal way to deal with a situation, this is a judgment call, as you point out. And in the world, regardless of things or whether drugs should be generic or not, whether climate change should be handled this way or not, whether carbon tax should be handled this way or not, there will be different camps with different points of view. And I guess in our minds, the ICANN way of solving problems through a multi-stakeholder process allows a more inclusive way for people to come at the decisions, even though we acknowledge that the decisions that we arrive at might make some people happy and at the same time make some people unhappy, just like, whether or not you have a carbon tax will make certain constituents happy and certain constituents less happy.
Okay, so what I was now coming back to was, wanting to come back to was the fact that, okay, one of the things that I heard in Buenos Aires, ICANN last month, was one of the ways to go and make the whole apparatus a little more transparent was about globalization of ICANN, which is what you have already thrown some light on, which is an ongoing work in progress. The other was globalization of IANA itself. Okay. During Buenos Aires, I did not hear anything about how it would be done. Okay. But right now, IANA is just a function which is done under contract with the US government. Period. Okay. How can it be globalized? I think I'll let Parminder have his thoughts on this, because that's where I think some so-called solution, I'm not saying this, so at least we would have a chance to have more deeper conversations and discussions on the global platform as to how that can be managed. And maybe that could bring in some kind of confidence among a larger community globally to say that, okay, fine, there is some say that we have. The US government is accepting our say. We have a better understanding of what it does and how it manages the entire distribution of internet address space is concerned, right? So
I think it's quite possible, and we are nearing that kind of a dialogue. And that would be easier if we keep on chopping off one after other areas which we agree. There is a timeout sign, and I think we have to close quickly. On agreements, like we need to agree that ICANN cannot be subject to the US law and US courts. Now, once we keep on agreeing to one, that means we go to the next step. We'll figure out how, but it cannot happen. Therefore, there has to be international law. Now, if there has to be international law, ICANN has to be incorporated under international law. That we agree on. The next point is, it should be a free-float organization, or should there be an oversight? Every executive decision needs an oversight. Then the 2 points are, is it a post facto or a pre-facto oversight? After ICANN decides, before it goes into the root, somebody has to sign it like IANA does now, or ICANN is allowed to do it, but there is some kind of a digital appellate court, maybe a part of the International Criminal Court, that you can appeal to, and then they can decide. I think these are the 2 options. And if we look like this, the problem isn't big, really. And you said, like, ICANN isn't the big problem. The big problems are on the other side. And I think it's easy to do it. I think the difference is only whether you have to have ICANN decisions before they get into the root signed by somebody, in which case, if they have to be signed, it has to be an international body. Last point, that international body should not be intergovernmental. I think it should be a set of technical experts with some kind of government backing. Maybe 2 people from all regions of technical universities or the national CC space, which has some backing of the governments, but are essentially technical people. So they know, and there is a distance between technical policy and public policy.
Quickly before I end the panel discussion and then move over to the audience, I think one thing that you mentioned was about an international body. Now, ICANN seems to have taken a step in at least announcing, I don't know whether they will go through with it or how much time it will take, is that they want to go and get registered as an international non-governmental organization in Switzerland. Okay, so that's one of the thoughts that's coming up.
Law has to be international.
As well. As well. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I mean, they have taken this, that's something that they have talked about. How it's going to happen, we don't know yet. So let's watch this space, and maybe the community can try and push towards that in a manner that is suitable and acceptable to everybody. So that's one part. I think we will probably have just about 5 or 10 minutes. How much time do we have? Time out. Okay, already. So give us 5 minutes, maybe a quick 3 to 4 questions quickly from the audience. Yeah, there's a hand there. Can you introduce yourself, please, and then tell us who you want the answer from?
Yeah, the answer can be from anybody. I'm Manoj from Infosys. I just would like to know, like, is it possible to have a single body which manages DNS at a high level? Now, I hear IANA, I hear ICANN, and there are scope of activities involved in for each of the groups. Yeah, one of the issues what I notice is that there is a larger set of control of the root servers, within the scope of US, geography. in short, like they are in my understanding, they are in control of the root server. So in general, they can bring down one entire root if they require. So I believe you just mentioned about distributing the GTLDs across different geographical zones and so on. So what are the approaches which can be considered to make it more to prevent a single point of failure kind of a thing?
Okay, so what I'm saying, today IANA controls the root servers. Okay, is there a way that there's another organization that takes over? That is the question, right? And then it manages it better without coming to a situation where IANA could become a single point of failure. Right. So an alternative mechanism to that.
I guess, if you want to make sure that all your IP addresses and all your names are unique, under one interoperable system, you probably want one body looking at it. I think that's the premise. But the resiliency question is something that I think we're very happy to address. ICANN maintains the L root, and what I'm hoping to do as well is to make sure that the L root is replicated as many times as possible in terms of L root instances. And how it works is that there's usually a $0 contract that if there's a volunteer in the audience that procures the hardware, there's a $0 contract where we then have a system set up so that you can have a carbon copy or an instance of that root. And the more of that we have, the more resilient the entire system is. I just wanted to quickly respond as well in terms of the governance and as well as to what Parminder said. I'm in absolute agreement. And the strategic panels that I mentioned are exactly meant to address these issues. I don't have a slide, but let me leave you with this email address so that you can give feedback. If like you had 2 suggestions, for example, and we want to get Asian perspectives to feed into the strategic panels. And so the email address is just apakhub@icann.org. We're taking all comments to feed into the eventual process. It's something that depending on what it is, I'm happy to make publicly available of what we receive on the community wiki.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good thing to do. Okay. Right now you've given the email address. Any questions that you have with regard to ICANN, you can always address to Kuek on his email address. And of course there is this OneNet initiative by ICANN, which is onenet.org.
It's not by ICANN.
Okay, it's proxy. Okay, so that's another thing that we talked about. So let's not get into that. So onenet.org is where anyone can go register himself and become a part of the mailing list that ICANN has set up, so that people can, or someone from ICANN has set up, Okay. Question there.
My name is Nehashish. I am from Center for Internet and Society. My question is to Kuek. If we say that the gold standard for multi-stakeholderism is a veto power to all the stakeholders, so each and every stakeholder will have a veto power on the policy making forum. If that's the gold standard, and the other end of the spectrum there is multilateralism. So where would you put ICANN within this particular yardstick or within this particular framework? And also ICANN has the multi-stakeholder process, and that's commendable, but with major issues like, for example, domain name disputes, the policies around domain name disputes, the consultations happen, but the participation is minimum. I saw like 2 responses to a domain name dispute policy change, which said that the registrant, because when a domain name dispute starts, the registrant, the particular domain is locked, and the registrant is given a notice, in particular to avoid cyber flight, whereas the registrant transfers the domain name to someone else, the registrant is not given a notice. So policies which impact free speech to that extent. are not commented upon that much. So there is a problem which exists, and how to solve the problem is a question.
You want to address it here now, because I think it'll take time to address his question. So maybe you want to do it offline?
Or we'll take all the questions and we can answer them.
No, I'm just going to go for one last question after this. So you want to quickly address it?
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So the first question, I'm not sure if I agree that the gold standard should be any single one group have a veto power. We could end up with a situation where nothing moves, because if anything triggers something that someone doesn't like, there's a veto power, and in the end, there's no innovation. We're stuck. We don't move. So I'm not sure that I would agree that that's the gold standard. I think there are many models for multi-stakeholderism out there. I hope that we represent a brand where it is open and inclusive, and yet at the same time, you see innovation allowed to happen. You see IDNs, for example, you see new GTLD programs. So despite its messy and long process, things can still move. I think that in my mind is some form of success, and I hope that's that. The issue about whether or not some issue gets enough traction, I think we have to in some ways allow for the market forces of thoughts come through. For example, the Snowden issue is something that has attracted a lot of attraction for right and wrong reasons. That is something that we need to let it play its course. There might be a freedom of speech issue that in your mind is not getting enough traction. I would urge you to explore other avenues to gain more attraction to the issue.
Okay, thank you so much, and I think I will close this session now. Oh, okay, so he has the veto power, so I can't refuse a question from him.
Not that way. I'm Kamlesh Bajaj. I simply wanted to compliment the panel for excellent discussion, really. All the issues have come to the fore and have been debated very nicely. But I'd like to take you to historically to 1997. Till that time, John Postal was actually implementing the IANA function as a one-man, as an intellectual, as a professor, as a person who was actually running the show at that time. But then in 97, when the internet was opened up for e-commerce under the US document, I think perhaps the government understood the import of the opening of the internet, which the world at large could not understand, taking your terminology of at large. So surely they couldn't have understood really, because nobody was using it. It's only gradually. And at that time, ICANN itself got created. So ICANN subsumed not just the technical functions, the way Parminder has been trying to argue, not just the technical function, but all the policy around it, which is to do everything in cyberspace, and which has a bearing on the physical space. That is copyright, intellectual property, cyber crimes, anything to do with cyber weapons, militarization of cyberspace. So policy making ultimately came down to ICANN, which it has been exercising over the last 15 odd years. And quoting this gentleman, really, multi-stakeholderism is something which is very difficult to define. And I was in a panel in Cybersecurity Summit where US and Russia were agreeing on technical definitions. So the Russians said, how can we translate multi-stakeholderism into Russian language? There's no equivalent. So that is a problem which everybody will face, apart from the English language interpretation which he provided, that who will have the final say. And today it is the ICANN board which has the final say. So unless that thing changes, as Parminder has been arguing, that policy making will stay where it is, because cyberspace is being won, and nobody wants balkanization of that unless they are forced to. So I think these are the challenges which we will wait to see how they unfold in the restructuring process of ICANN and multiple other institutions which have signed together in October in the declaration in Latin America, that they will throw away the yoke of the US government. And let's see how it really works out, and in reality whether it actually happens. But then we have to strive towards one net, as you said, one NET, as one cyberspace. But then the policy making is something which we have to see that the sovereign governments have say in that. How it happens, one doesn't know really.
Thank you, Dr. Bajaj. I think that was very secondly put. It's a very large issue, and I think we are not seeing the end of these challenges. It's only going to grow with the opening up of the GTLD. Internet is evolving still, Okay, and I think there are many more issues that will surface up as we go by, and not really in sometime in the future, but maybe very, very soon. And there are so many contentious issues that will come up, and we really do not have a fix on what kind of structure would really work, because each issue will have its own different dimensions and solutions attached to it. And I think there are circles within the internet community globally which say, okay, let's just discuss the issues, but let's not arrive at a solution. So let's not fix it. Okay, so that's another dimension that happens. So anyway, this is something that has been discussed for years. We'll probably discuss for years again going forward. Good to have a panel like this, and thank you to Parminder and to Samuel and to Kuek coming in from Singapore for this session, and for all the inputs. And any questions that anyone has offline, we are available here for some time, and you can always address it to DSCI. And thank you, DSCI, for bringing up this topic, because I think, again, as in India, there are very few platforms where such issues, which are very live globally, are actually discussed within India. Yeah. And I think that's very relevant, and I hope to see some of these conferences happening with DSCI and these issues getting discussed more, and more participation from Indians at ICANN and the UN level. That's going to be a great thing to do. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.